let's get started by talking about some key principles of economics. Now, here we're going to be thinking about both micro and macroeconomics, and the number of principles that we're going to talk about is 11, but if you use other economics textbooks, it might be 10 or 12. It doesn't matter too much the exact number. One thing that's unique about economics is that in general, we tend to think about really a shared set of principles that are going to be guiding our study throughout this entire course and then onward in your own study of economics. So in terms of our principles, we're going to break them into 3 groups. The first group in this video is going to be about how individuals make choices, and we're going to have some key terminology and some key assumptions we make there. Then in the other videos, we're going to talk about the interaction of those choices that people make, and then we're also going to talk about economy-wide interactions. So the first principle we're going to think about is the idea that choices are necessary because resources are scarce. One example that comes to my mind really quickly is if I think of the case of the Aral Sea. So up here you've got an Aral Sea that has water in it around 1989, and then you have an Aral Sea that does not have water in it in 2004. Essentially what happened here was that at the time the USSR made the decision that they were going to drain the Aral Sea and use that water for irrigation. Essentially water is our resource and it's scarce. There's only so much water on our planet and we have so many uses for it. And in the case here, the decision was whether that water would be better served in the sea or whether it should be used for irrigation. And the choice was made to use it to increase farm productivity. But then, as you can see, there were some pretty substantial environmental consequences. More broadly, we're going to define a resource as anything that can be used to produce something else. So water is a resource. Wood is a resource. Steel is a resource. But things that we might not always consider as resources are also important too. For example, our time is a resource. Our own abilities and skills, which we're going to call human capital, those are resources. And we're going to say they're scarce when they are in short supply. A resource is scarce when there's not enough of that resource to satisfy all the ways we could use it. Some things can be very scarce. For example, we think of gold, rare earth minerals as being very scarce. We think of water as less scarce, but it's still limited and it's still less of it than all the ways that we could use it. And then our time is also scarce. It's limited and there are many ways we'd like to spend our time. So we might take a minute and think about which of these are scarce resources: water, garbage, sleep, papayas, and dandelions. And essentially, the 2 questions we need to ask ourselves are first, are they resources? Do we use them to make something else? Water, for sure. Garbage, usually not. Usually we think of that as a byproduct of production. You could think about the production of energy through trash incinerators, but usually no. Sleep, absolutely. We use sleep to produce better mental and physical health. Papayas, that is a resource in that it provides us energy. And dandelions can or cannot be, kind of depending on your own uses and what kind of where you live and how you exist in the world. You could think of them as useless, as weeds, or you could think of them as something that provide important habitat for bees, right? So that's how we kind of define resources. Are they going to be an input into something else? Then we're going to think about whether or not they're scarce. I've already made the case that water is scarce. Garbage we're not going to think of as scarce. There's a lot of garbage. It's more garbage than we know what to do with. It's one of the reasons why we pay people to take our garbage. They don't pay us to take our garbage. Even though we can use it and we can think of, uses that are better than just sitting there, we have far more garbage than we know what to do with. Sleep, we can think about as scarce for most people. We think of it as our time is limited. We often aren't able to get all the sleep we need. Papayas are scarce. They're more scarce here in Vermont than they might be in other places that grow papayas, but in any case, they are going to be scarce. And then dandelions, again, it really depends. If you're thinking about a place or culture, a community where the community values honeybees and their ability to live long, fed live so they can go and pollinate crops, then we might think of open spaces with dandelions as scarce. On the other hand, many homeowners will treat dandelions as a pest and a nuisance, and far too abundant. But again, in that case, they're not really providing them with any resources either. So that's how we can kind of classify those things. The short answers we would put here is we would always say yes to A, we would say yes to C, and we'd say yes to D. E, probably not, and then B, almost certainly not. We can also think of the resources that are scarce in our life. We can think of those things like time. We can think of money. We might think of things that help us succeed that we don't always have enough of. Maybe we have scarce class time to get the information we need. Maybe we have scarce time with friends because they're very busy. Those things can produce happiness for us, or they can produce exchanges of knowledge, depending on how technical you want to get. Our second principle is the idea that the true cost of something is its opportunity cost. Now, in general, when we think about costs, we think about going to the store and buying something, right? If I go to a restaurant and I buy myself a very fancy sandwich, it might be $15, right? That's the price of it. That's the cost. I give up $15. The idea of an opportunity cost is that with the $15 sandwich, I should think about what I would have done with those $15 if I hadn't spent it on the sandwich, right? What would have the next best use been? And there are millions of ways that I could spend $15. It could be the case that I otherwise would have spent that money to go see a movie. And that's, for me, my personal next best option. The opportunity cost of the sandwich is $15, but the opportunity cost is effectively the movie because I would have spent that $15 on the movie. Now, maybe I wouldn't have spent that money. I would have saved it. And so over time, the opportunity cost of the sandwich is the $15 plus any foregone interest I might have accrued had I put it in a bank account. Now, money is a useful measure of costs because it's easy for us to think about what those opportunity costs are, but we can also think about joy, right? If I am dating someone and I go out on a date with them, that might not cost me any money. It may, depends if I'm picking up the check. But assuming that we're going to just walk in a park, totally free, there's still an opportunity cost. It's still not a free date because I've given up what I would have done if I hadn't gone out on that date. Maybe I would have studied. Maybe I would have worked at a job. Maybe I would have done nothing, right? And so that opportunity cost, what our next best options are, helps shape the choices we make by determining exactly what the costs are in comparison to the benefits that we get from making a personal choice. An important thing here is this idea of a sunk cost. A sunk cost is the idea of a cost that has already been paid that we cannot recoup. So if I'm thinking about buying a sandwich, that's not sunk. That's a cost I'm going to pay or I'm not going to pay. I can still make that choice. But if I feel bad about the sandwich I bought last week, no decision I can make now can recoup the cost of that sandwich. That's a sunk cost. We can't go back in time. We're not time travelers. Another way of thinking about it is that if somebody gives me if I buy a ticket to a concert, maybe an expensive ticket, a $100 ticket, a lot of people will go to the concert. They bought the ticket. They're very happy about it. Now, what if I lose that ticket? Many people would say, okay, I've lost the ticket. I've already paid $100. I guess I'm not going to go. But once you've lost that ticket, that cost is sunk. The question should be, given the amount of money you have left, do you still value that concert at $100? Now, for some people, their budgets may be limited, and so the answer is no. They don't, given how much money they have left, it's not worth it to go to the concert. But for other people, they may still have enough money. And if the concert truly brings you $100 worth of joy, then it would make sense to go forward and do that, regardless of the fact that you had already bought the ticket and then lost it. That's what it means to disregard the sunk cost. We can think of this as an example in terms of regret. So let's say I bought a $10 ticket to go see a movie. I thought I was going to like this movie. I don't. I hate this movie. I'm sitting in this movie. I'm stuck in this movie. So what is the opportunity cost of staying? If I leave, I can't get my money back. And that in itself will compel many of us to stay put because we were like, well, I've already spent $10. I might as well just stick it out. But the opportunity cost is what I could be doing if I left. I could be sneaking into another theater and watching a better movie. I could go home and read a book. I could go study or work or make myself cookies. All of these things that I'm giving up by staying, that's the true cost of staying. Even though I've paid that entrance fee and I can't get it back, there is a cost to continuing to be at this movie. The ticket price is sunk. Additionally, we could think about a relationship, right? There's going to be benefits to staying in that relationship, but if it's the case that you don't think it's going anywhere, there still is a cost of being in it. Maybe it's the probability that you find love. Maybe it's the potential of self-discovery. Maybe it's the fact that the nights you spend out with JC that weren't that great for you, you could have been doing something else that would have brought you more joy. Those are opportunity costs. If we have an example like this, we're signing up for a free yoga class, meets for 1 hour a week. All right, if I go to the yoga class, it costs me nothing. But if I don't go, I could work. I could either flip hamburgers for $8 an hour, or I could wait tables for $5 an hour. If I want to think about the opportunity cost of attending, I have to think about what am I giving up to go to this free yoga class? I'm not paying for it, it's free, but the opportunity cost is not $0 because I'm giving up my next best option. And in this case, my next best option, assuming I feel indifferent about the 2 job options, would be flipping the hamburgers for $8. So the opportunity cost is $8. If I go to the yoga class, I spend nothing. But if I went and worked, I would have $8. So I'm down $8 by going to the yoga class in terms of the opportunity cost. This changes the calculation a little bit if there is a cost of the yoga class. Because now, if I go to the yoga class, I pay $10. And if I work at my best option, flipping hamburgers, I earn $8. The gap between those two is $18. So now the opportunity cost of that yoga class is $18, not $10, and not $8. One thing that's important to note here is that I've listed 2 options. In our lives, there might be 1,000 options. But what matters for our consideration is only the next best option. And we can therefore say that if we're picking the next best option, everything else is inferior because it's the 3rd, 4th, and 5th best options. We don't have to sum them all up. The last version I want to do is to pretend that we've already paid $10 and we can't get it back. Essentially, that's a sunk cost. I bought this 2 weeks ago. If I go to the yoga class, it's free. If I don't go, I don't get my $10 back. So if I go, I pay nothing. If I don't go, I get $8. So actually now we're back to the original circumstance in which the opportunity cost of going to the yoga class is $8. Effectively, because the cost is sunk, the choices here in terms of your opportunity cost are the same in this situation as they are in this situation. Because in neither world can we get our money back. All right, one more example because this is tricky. You can spend $300 on a pair of sneakers or a new skateboard. They both cost the same. Assume these are your best choices. So if you buy the sneakers, what is our opportunity cost here? Well, let's think about what we're giving up. If I buy the sneakers, then I spend $300. If I buy the skateboard, I spend $300. The money is the same. So by buying the sneakers, what have I given up? I've given up my enjoyment of the skateboard. That's the only thing I've given up. Essentially, the $300 isn't a factor, not because it's not sunk. So this is not a sunk cost story, okay? This is not sunk. This is just not an issue because it's part of both choices. So there's no difference there. I give up $300 either way. So here it's really the enjoyment of the skateboard. That's what I'm giving up by getting the Air Jordans. Alternatively, you could flip it and say, what is the opportunity cost of the skateboard? It's the enjoyment you get from the Air Jordans. All right. Our third principle, is the idea that we make our decisions at the margins, and that when we make those decisions, we're going to weigh our trade-offs. Trade-offs are just comparing the benefits and costs. When we were discussing opportunity costs, right, we thought about what those costs are, and we're going to compare them to what we get out of it. This principle tells us that when we do that comparison, we're going to do it unit by unit. We're not going to make a decision about whether I'm going to do yoga for my entire life or never. We're going to decide one class at a time whether I'm going to attend. And this is very similar to how we make decisions, right? Even if I sign up for 10 yoga classes at once, day on day, I'm going to make that decision at the margin. I like to think of it in terms of, say, an all-you-can-eat buffet. Once I've paid my $15 or $20 to enter the buffet, then there is a benefit from a plate of food, and then there's a cost. Now, the marginal cost in terms of money is actually zero for a buffet, right? If I eat 1 plate, 2 plate, 3 plates, 4 plates, once I'm in, the marginal cost is actually zero. I don't pay anything else. There could be a cost in case of stomach discomfort that we have to think about, but there's no additional cost. That tends to make us overeat sometimes. And our marginal benefit may be positive and probably will decrease over time. Our first benefit, our first plate is delicious. Second plate, probably still delicious. Third plate, maybe we're starting to feel full. Fourth plate, regrets. So the idea is that when we're making a decision at a buffet, we don't pre-commit to 5 plates or no plates. We decide plate on plate, weighing the marginal benefit, what we get out of one more plate versus the marginal cost. And once we're in the restaurant, once we've sunk that entrance cost, there is no marginal cost of the next plate. The last principle of individual choice is the idea that people usually respond to incentives. That is, if there's a way to make themselves better off, they probably will do it. I think of this in the sense of if I ask students, assign students reading, many of them will do it, but there may be a lot of competing things on their time. If there's a small assignment tied to it where there are points as a result of reading it, I'm likely to get more students to read it. I haven't changed the value of the reading. I haven't changed the excitement of the reading or the learning, but I've created a small incentive, and students tend to respond to incentives. It doesn't mean that everyone is going to do the reading because some people may have other things going on. They may be sick. They may have had a busy night. They may not be motivated to get the highest grade they possibly could. All of those things are going to, determine how they weigh the marginal costs and marginal benefits of completing an assignment. But if I've provided an incentive, that will likely encourage people to make themselves better off, in this case by doing the reading for our class. Now, this can also backfire. So one example that comes up a lot is this idea of a cobra effect. The story goes that when the British were colonizing India, they were concerned about cobras, not a friendly snake. And so they wanted to create an incentive for people to reduce the cobra population. And so specifically what they said is that if you bring me a cobra skin, we'll give you some money. And so this indeed created an incentive for people to find lots of cobra skins, which meant finding a lot of cobras. One of those avenues was looking for wild cobras and capturing them. But the other was raising cobras, because then you can get a lot of cobras very quickly. This created basically a perverse result. So instead of there being fewer cobras, there were more cobras. And once the British realized that they were paying for cobras that people had farmed, they stopped. Now, farmers had a lot. They stopped the payments. Now, farmers had a lot of cobras and no money. They released the cobras. And so as a result, you ended off worse than where you started. We've seen this in other situations. Here's an example of a boar. People trying to get rid of wild boars. I think it was in Florida, but I'm not sure. Somewhere in the American Southeast. And similarly, there was evidence that people were indeed raising boars as a way of getting the bounty on it. We're going to stop here. The next video is going to turn to interaction and individual choice.